my name is Alex McGregor and this is my home. I'm a second generation stonemason from Summit County, Colorado, and I'm going to be taking you guys with me to a few different projects, showing you some tricks of the trade that I've developed over the last 15 years of doing this work professionally, and hopefully you guys can enjoy it and find some tips and tricks that can help you with your do-it-yourself projects at home, or if you got a bigger project you're working on. And the first job we're going to do is a little stone fireplace repair in Breckenridge. So let's get to it. For today's project, we're going to be fixing this fireplace. As you can see, the stone was originally attached directly to this plywood, and there was no mesh and there was nothing used to really secure it. They just threw it on with some thin set. So what happened was these stones actually fell off. They caused some damage to the floor and they shattered into many pieces. So we're going to take the rest of these stones off and prep this properly with some mesh and a scratch coat. And then we're going to get some new stones and reinstall. So the first step for any job like this that's in a very nice finished house is to protect the floor, to make sure that through our work we don't cause any further damage. So that's what we're gonna do. We got a heavy duty drop cloth, plastic drop cloth that we can tape right down to the floor. And then I also have a cloth drop cloth, which will add a little bit more protection. All right, now I got my demolition tools ready. I got my brick hammer, a cat's paw, and a big old pry bar. So I should be able to work these things up into these gaps and gently pry these rocks off, hopefully without breaking any. So that was way too easy. I don't know if you guys could saw, but I was barely touching these to get them off. They were just sitting on there. One little tap with that pry bar. I didn't even need to use my big cool new one. So it looks like they just put thin set on there and hoped it would stick. Thin set doesn't stick to particle board or drywall. So thankfully this will be a really easy fix. None of these broke, so we can get them back where they go. But yeah, that is masonry malpractice right there for sure. All right, so our next step is to protect the firebox and install the mesh all the way around. All right, I got the firebox covered. Again, I use the blue tape and duct tape system. One thing I really like is that when I pull that tape off, it'll make a nice clean joint line. So to attach the stone in a better way, we're going to be installing this diamond mesh. And this is a really heavy duty metal lath that has this honeycomb pattern and these little ridges. It might be hard to see, but the ridges are angled and they point up towards the front. This holds the mortar on a lot better than just a prayer or whatever they were using before. To attach the mesh, we're going to be using two different types of screws. The first one is this Tex brand metal tapping screw. It's intended to anchor the metal lath to metal. So that little bit of black along the firebox, I'm going to be using these guys. And then to attach to the wall, I'm actually using these cement board screws. Almost any screw will work fine. I like these because those heads are just a little bit bigger and they grab into the holes of the mesh better. One thing you want to make sure of is that you get these long enough to reach through the plywood and the particle board into the studs. So I got 1.5 inches, so that'll give us a good solid anchor into those studs. And real easy, you just cut it and screw it into place. To cut it, you can use a lot of different things. I'm gonna use these metal clippers. You can also use a grinder or different bigger metal shears, whatever works, but it's real simple to install. When you're making your measurements to cut it, I always go a little bit short. This blue tape is going to be my final line. Usually I do it nice and straight, but I'm just following what they had. So I'm going to measure about a 1/2 inch short in every dimension. That way my mesh will come right next to the edge, and then I'll have room for getting a nice good mud joint in there. Same with the firebox. I'm gonna stop it about a 1/2 inch short of this edge here. The space above the firebox measured 54 inches across, so I'm gonna cut it right at 53. So holding my tape measure in place, I'm gonna make my first snip, and then it's pretty easy just to follow the pattern and go straight up. I forgot, this is super duper sharp, so should always make sure I have my gloves on. The space vertically is 12 inches, so I'm just gonna cut a ways up, probably past 12. Let's see, we can measure. 12 is there, so I got a little bit further to go. It's not easy stuff to work with, but it's good for sticking stone to walls. All right, now I got my 53 cut, and I'm up at least 12 inches, so now I can flip to the other side and cut it all the way down the long way. Mesh is on. One thing we want to make sure of is that there's no wiggly spots, so we can kind of go around and tap on it. A little bit of wiggle is okay, but spots like this, see how much that's flexing right there? If we put our stone on there, it could just flex right off. So when you're done, just go around and tap everything. It looks like right there's no good, but for the most part, the rest of this is good. So we'll just grab our drill and throw a couple more screws in there. Yeah, one more there and we'll be good. Next up, we can do our scratch coat. Another important thing to note is to find the studs. Like here, we know there's gonna be a stud right there, and I got two. I'm gonna throw another one in there, a couple more into the studs, because that really is what's holding the mesh on. Is getting it through the plywood into that stud. And here we can see these old screws, so we can assume there's a stud there. And I'll get one right there. Yeah, that feels like it's going into something solid. And I got 1, 2, 3 in that stud, 1, 2, 3 for sure in that stud. Over here we're good. So yeah, let's mix some mud and get to scratch coating. It is really bright out here. Okay, so I stepped outside to mix because it is quite a messy job. What we're gonna be using is the Mason's Mix Type S from Quickcrete. So it's all pre-mixed stuff, you just add water to it. You can use a stone veneer mortar, but I found this stuff works really well and it's really easy to work with. So we're just gonna mix in these buckets here. About 1/4 of a bag should do for what we got going on. Now to mix, I am just gonna be using a trowel. You can get one of those drill paddle mixers, but for what we're doing, this works fine. It's not really too hard to do, so let's get to it. First thing, I'm gonna add a little bit of water, just a splash into the bucket we're gonna mix in, because if you don't get it wet beforehand, the mortar can just clump up in those corners and stick real bad. So that'll do there. I'm just gonna rip open one corner of it. There, now I got about 1/2 a bucket worth. Go ahead and add a little water. And just spin it around. For this, you do need it kind of wet, but you want it to be able to stick to your trowel. So this is a little too wet at this point, so I'll just add a little bit more powder and we'll get it good. All right, let's see. Oof, it's just a tiny bit wet, but we can let it slake, which means we'll just let it sit for a few minutes and it'll dry up just a little bit. Then we can remix it and it should be good to go. So let's get out of the cold and head back inside. Before we do that, in order to apply the scratch coat, I'm gonna be using this just real simple tile trowel. I like to put the mortar on there, use this to smear it onto the wall, and then you can make your actual scratch coats with these groove teeth right here. They'll leave little ridges that will help the new stone to adhere to it. All right, our mortar is slaked and it's drier now. It's a good consistency, so we can start doing our scratch coat. You want to get a little of this mortar on your trowel. You can set it on your tile trowel. Now this is much easier to do on big walls. These small walls are kind of awkward, but we'll see how we go. You only really need a good thin layer on there just to fill in all those holes and get yourself a nice surface to work off of. One thing you can notice I did right here is I put some tape over the gas shutoff for the fireplace so I don't make a mess of that. And then I can kind of scratch coat that over it, and I'll remove that tape when it's dry. So for this skinnier part here, I think I'm just gonna do it with my trowel. It'll take a couple more swipes, but it might be easier. And I'm being kind of loose with it here and along these edges, because when I install the stone, I'll put enough mortar on to fill those gaps, and then we can make a nice clean grout line with it. Okay, I'm gonna switch things up and try using this trowel for that skinny side, see if it's any easier. Both are frustrating, so whatever. So you can do the first one and only push lightly just to get it on there. Then come back with more pressure to kind of redistribute the mud a little bit. Yeah, I'm definitely not a plaster guy. I'm sure if there's any proper plaster people watching, they are embarrassed for me and because of me. But I'm a stonemason, not a plaster guy. And come back and install the stone. All right, we're back this morning and looks like they got our rock. So I went ahead and set a couple of these pieces in place. So now we can get an idea of what the fireplace will look like when it's all done. So we got the bottom here, and I'll cut those pieces to fit into place. So I'll show you guys that, but this should be a pretty easy job finishing this up. First thing we're gonna do is mix up some mortar, a little wetter than we did yesterday. You need it a little wetter in order to stick the rock on real nice. So I'll show you that consistency when I'm done mixing, and then I'll show you how to set the stones, and we'll wrap this up pretty quick. All right, we got our mortar all mixed, and you can see it's a little bit wetter. It kind of slides off the trowel, but this will stick really nicely to the stone. So we got our first stone here that we want to set. I'm not actually going to take this thin set off because it's adhering to the stone really well, and the roughness of it will make a decent surface to bond to. So leaving this just like it is to prep the stone, get a bit of mortar on your trowel and set it on there. Then you can smooth it into the edges, get it into those grooves and make a nice flat surface. Now, right along this edge where I have that tape, I'm gonna want a nice grout line. And you could come back later with a grout bag and do it, but I'm trying to get out of here today. So this is gonna be my edge right here that goes along the wall. So I'm actually gonna grab a little bit extra mortar and do a bigger bead right there. So that should fill in that gap. It should work real nicely. All right, let's come down here. Setting this stone, you want to get it close into place and then line it up where you want it and give it just a little bit of a wiggle and push. And yeah, that looks good. So you can see the stone's on there, the mortar's just a little recessed, and it's filled in this gap pretty nicely. So that's the basics of how to set stone, and now we just do it that many more times. All right, time to get to work. Say it's going pretty smooth so far. The one thing I had to do was cut one of these new rocks to fit there. If you can see, it's a little bit of a different color. So these ones are a bit lighter, so I'm gonna blend them in. I got one down low. I'm gonna mix up the ones up high. Yeah, going well, but I'm out of mud. All right, we got all of our stone on. We got our side joint filled in, and I pulled the tape off to this one side. Got our top joint filled in. So now I'm gonna show you guys how I actually finish these joints and clean them up. Now this is gonna be a bit of a different way than I've done usually, because usually I would have my pointer and I would make these joints fit a lot cleaner. But I'm using their stone and their work, so there are a few gaps, especially like down here and that big gap there. So to finish these joints, first of all, I'm going to fill that one in a little bit because that's the way they had it before. All of those gaps had a bunch of mortar in it. And to do that, it's not very exciting, but I just got a little bit of dry mud here. Drier, and I'm just going to kind of finger it in there. And yes, I am smearing up the stone a little bit, but we will clean that off with a sponge when we're all done. And this again is not how I would normally do it, but I'm matching their work. So I can get it in there with my finger, hit it with this stiff bristled brush that really forces it in there. And you can see I'm doing pretty much the same thing up here. Now, this brush is really nice for cleaning it up and kind of forcing the mortar into the joints, but it will leave it looking kind of rough. So after I hit everything With this stiff bristled brush, I'll come back and hit it with a softer bristled brush. And another thing you can do, see I got my old soft bristled brush here, but it has this nice wooden handle. And this wooden handle is really good for cleaning up these joints and flattening them out. Now we got them smooth, we can hit them with the brush. And hit there, hit these ones. All right, now I can take this tape and plastic off so we can properly clean up these joints. See, it's pretty clean. I'm just gonna kind of go through this with my finger to flatten these guys out, smooth it a bit. Then I can hit it with my broom. One thing you want to make sure of is that you're not doing this step when the mortar is too wet, or else you'll make a big smeared mess out of everything. Okay, so you guys get the gist of what I'm doing. I'm gonna put you back over on the table and finish this up. Hooray, we are finished. Nothing left to do now but clean up and sponge up. So there is a tiny little bit of smear, like you see these darker spots. We'll come back in with a sponge and clean that up. Also clean the stuff off the wall. But yeah, and the firebox. Clean the firebox too. Okay, so not too difficult, a little frustrating with those rocks not matching perfectly. I had to cut them and shape them into place, but overall, pretty easy job. So thank you so much for watching. Please leave some comments and questions if you want to know more about what I did, or if you guys have an idea for another video or another thing you'd like to see in the universe of stonemasonry. Up next, I have a project where I'm doing a similar thing. There's an old brick wood burning fireplace, and I'm going to be removing the brick and the broken mantle and hearth, and I'm going to be reinstalling with a really cool blue stone. So stay tuned for that. Again, my name is Alex McGregor, Rocky Road Masonry. You have a good one.